Good afternoon, everyone. And like our other speakers, thank you to KNOWLES for the invitation. It's the second year of the conference, I believe, and it looks like it's growing quite well. So thank you. Let's see how this gets going. Voila. A brief background. So I've been doing this for a little bit, about 30 years. And I did start in that team environment. I was working in a specialized ski racing environment. It was an elite level juniors up to about 20 years old. It was intensive. They were there full time and so forth, like many other sports academies out there. Past 16 years, I've been working more in a private sector, my own facility, but also in cooperation with orthopedic groups. The interesting part, and I'll discuss this more during the talk, is I started as a physical education student, studying that for a few years. And I went into the sports medicine side to become a certified athletic trainer. And then from there at this academy, I started developing as a reconditioning or a performance training coach because we needed to reduce injury rates and so forth. And now, just as a reconditioning specialist and a performance specialist, mainly working in just the professional realm. Athletes travel in from around the world to Philadelphia, where I'm from, and they stay in a residential type program. Okay. So everyone here has gotten to where they are, or they are on a journey, with these three key areas, both experience, evidence, and examples. And how we go through that in our journey decides what perspective you are looking at or listening to today, and how you are going to continue in your professional path. For myself, I went down this experience first type pathway with a lot of examples and so forth, but the research, the evidence came late. So my journey was about doing things and then slowly trying to understand why they worked. These past two speakers that have just been up in front of us today, it's fantastic because this is what's happened on my career, is that the smart guys tell me why I've been doing what I've been doing is very good and effective. But research is supposed to do that. It's supposed to look at what is working and making sure that there's a valid reason behind it. Well, there's that blend of experience-based evidence and evidence-based experience, the art and the science. They come together. And what we have to do is connect these things together and decide what path is most effective for you to be on, how much you will use each one of these areas. Some have gone right to university and then straight to their PhD. They have a lot of the evidence behind them, but really don't have any experience yet training athletes or working with athletes. Someone once told me that words create images and images create actions, and I'm a very visual learner. So when I'm doing things and then I hear certain words, that word quickly puts me on a path to understanding why I might be doing what I do. And that was physical education. So like I said, I started there in 1984, my first year at university, and so for 3 years studying physical education, to develop students' physical competence and knowledge, movement and safety, right? An eye on a healthy lifestyle. So for 3 years, that's what I looked at. I was an athlete myself, and then I started looking at how do you teach young people to become physically active for life, but also to be physically educated. In 1989, I finished university and started my first job at this ski racing academy as a certified athletic trainer. So we lived out in the mountains in the state of Vermont in the United States, and we developed some very talented ski racers there. But there were a lot of injuries. So for the first about 5 years or so, 6 years I think it was, we had a lot of new ACL injuries because there was equipment changes that contributed to a lot of these. So for about 9 years, I was just dealing hands-on, rehabilitating lots of femur fractures, tibia fractures, and a great deal number of ACLs. But this was not a protocol that I was following. As a certified athletic trainer from the United States, they really don't teach you anything about rehabilitation. You have to gain that over time. So I was looking at a physical education approach because that's what I knew. And then I also started to really learn quite a bit about strength training and performance training, because in order to reduce the number of injuries that were happening, you couldn't just do it by successfully rehabbing kids to then come back and not get hurt. That was one way to reduce re-injury. or our total injuries. So there again was, all right, my examples and my experience was not yet following a research-based perspective and also following written protocols. I had an orthopedic surgeon that I was working with closely because he was our team doctor, but he was an hour and a half away. So it's a long travel. And that was the only person that I was really talking to at the time. The internet wasn't a real strong source of information yet. It was just coming into play. But he gave me this paper after many years of me getting very, very good results with athletes coming back from knee injuries in the alpine ski racing, which is high risk, yet they weren't getting re-injured, and they were very strong. This paper, from a '96 paper, all of a sudden it put into context why the loading strategies that I was doing, how hard I was working these kids, was being successful. And it just looked at this idea of physiologic overload and supercompensation or physiologic overload and so forth, and this zone of homeostasis. So basically, if I was working athletes out and they didn't get inflammation, they didn't feel warm, if the knee wasn't swelling, if they weren't losing range of motion, if they didn't have increases in pain, I probably was maintaining a level of homeostasis that was successful, and I could continue then to push the athlete on. It's incredibly basic because I wasn't touching the ACL. I couldn't see the ACL healing. I didn't get bogged down by the biology of the healing because I couldn't necessarily change it other than just don't screw it up and have swelling and so forth. And then another paper that came out during that, or just after that, but it was introduced in '98 to me again. So now the first time that I hear about a neurophysiological insult. So I hear that and just say, yep, the brain bone is connected to the foot bone. I just want to keep it really simple. But it was all of a sudden talking about things that I was seeing in the reconditioning process that couldn't be explained. This insult that was happening to a quadricep or the lower extremity, and in particular to their movement qualities that just couldn't be explained. And I have been calling it a brain injury from very early on, having no idea why I called it a brain injury. A lot of that was a psychology of the brain injury, meaning lacking confidence, they don't want to move and things. But it was just kind of like, dude, you're a little bit messed up still. You don't bend right. You're not walking just quite right. Something isn't connecting. Something isn't clicking. So words create images and images create actions. So rehabilitation wasn't the term that I needed in order to define how I was doing and why I was doing it. I looked at reconditioning. It's a performance-based model for athletes after these injuries. It's based off of physical education or athletic development. Whereas rehabilitation that I was looking at was medical-based for treating athletes. Ooh, pardon me. Backwards. My fault. Medical-based, and it was on the principles of biological healing. Now that's a critically important part of this process, the biology. But once again, when I'm evaluating, or not evaluating, when I'm working and teaching and coaching these athletes, I'm not caught up on the biology, I'm caught up on what is in front of me and how well they're moving or not moving and so forth. Even though the biology is incredibly important, it should be taking place well. I respect biological, but I just encourage more athletic ways to go through this process of bringing athletes back from injury. So the psychology of this starts to happen right away. If we look at this as an idea that says, prepare the athlete, don't just focus on the knee. So why psychology is incredibly important, it's incredibly important every day in the environment that you create. Are they walking into an environment where you ask them on a regular basis, how is their knee feeling? How is their knee doing today? And everyone around them is asking, how is your knee doing? They should be able to look into the gym or the therapy clinic and realize that an athlete is just training. They also happen to have a knee injury. So the biology or the rehabilitation model, and again, it's how I choose to define it. You can define it any way you would like. It did focus on the knee. And much of what I was told that I could not do or I should not be doing to this reconstructed knee was about the knee. It wasn't about the athlete. It was about the healing biology of the ligament or the meniscus. The problem was everything I was doing was not causing any problems, and we were only just getting fantastic results, and it was supported by an orthopedic surgeon that was our team physician. So I've always said is the knee doesn't do it by itself. I only see how the knee fits into the whole movement strategy. See, this is really about this can-do versus can't-do mentality. That video should be playing. I don't know if you can click on that. It certainly did when I gave you my computer. So, no, let's go back one, please. That's okay. That's okay. Can do versus can't do. What we have is an athlete, an NFL football player, at 6 days post-op with a full knee dislocation. He's just doing a running drill in that pool at a low intensity. He's braced because his knee's dangling, basically. So, but he has the brace on for this little initial phase. I didn't have to coach him really how to do that. He knew exactly what needed to take place next. Voila. So the can-do has always been something about me when I look at protocols. And if a protocol says you shouldn't be doing these, or I'm sorry, these are the only exercises that you're supposed to be doing, what I look at that is saying, well, it's not saying that I can't do all of these other exercises. It was really circumnavigating, being a little bit of an ass, really. But it had to do with saying, if I move them, they feel better for it. So all of a sudden, this can-do attitude is about preparing the athlete, and this is what started to develop the reconditioning mindset. Focus on the whole athlete, focus on the can-do positive aspect of this. And after 4.5 weeks after an ACL reconstruction, this hockey player, NHL kid, he's walking with a spring in his step. This isn't just an athlete walking and saying, look how great. It's about the attitude and how he's carrying himself there. If we can be at that place quickly, then they spiritually, mentally, are already getting very far ahead of this entire process. So I keep things incredibly simple. We've had some wonderful lectures today that are talking at a very great level and looking at the science and the research and all of the information. I continue to drive a very simple explanation while it's riddled with very complex issues. Biology and how the body functions and works, it can be incredibly complex. But if we allow it to be very simple in how we approach it, we may become very effective. And that's where this idea of the restoration of athletic normal. We had a very good talk in saying these 5 pillars or 4 or 5 pillars of what is your goal? Pain-free knee, full athletic function, and so forth. I brought it down just for myself to say, restore athletic normal. And it's difficult. Everyone may have a little different impression of what that, but it's a really good discussion. Because what it looked like was we had an athlete who's playing, who probably is fairly normal physically and how they move, functionally, how they bend and so forth. And then there's an injury. And basically what was normal is no longer normal now. And the end goal is just to bring this athlete back to that place. Pretty straightforward. They're doing it, they can't do it, get them back to doing it again. Athletic normal, a state where an athlete is free to express movement competencies. And these have been developed over years of play, meaning playing their sport, but actually when they were younger, playfulness, physical education, running and skipping and these kinds of things. So restore an athlete's fundamental movement qualities and or improve them. Actually, all of a sudden, this is this athletic development discussion. So athletic normal really is about train the athlete like they know how to be trained. Well, because of the physical education background, the discussion is about physical literacy, physical competency. How do you teach young people to be physically educated, physically active, and competent to do many different things? So literacy, the ability to reduce, produce, and stabilize forces, we hear that on a regular biomechanical discussion and so forth, but walking and skipping and running and jumping and pushing and pulling, it's PE class, physical education class, or at least it used to be. It used to be very good. It's not quite as good these days. Physical competency, the ability to physically express oneself with sport-specific actions with precision, style, and grace. This is competency. This is athletic normal. And I say regardless of the situation you find yourself in, because we just heard from our previous speaker, it's not the same. The positions aren't the same on a regular basis. It's not the lab, it's not the PT clinic, it's the reality in sport. So regardless of what is happening, you can still perform actions with precision, style, and grace. So physical literacy, yeah, this is the simplistic look at it. Was the really exciting time when you were just discovering what pulling and climbing and rolling and tumbling was about. But when athletes get injured, they can't do these things. Or more importantly, they're not allowed to do these things. So physical competency then, regardless of the situation you find yourself in. You can jump, you can land, you just need to do it catching the ball with 50,000 people screaming at you, and now you have to come down from that place. Literacy, as we see, yeah. So maybe the jump testing, the single leg landing, the single leg hops, they're just aspects of literacy. They really don't necessarily say how competent you are to do those in sport-specific actions. It lets you know that you are literate in jumping and landing on a foot with good positions, but it doesn't always transfer. We'll see if this pulls up. This looked like our last one. Maybe I'll try clicking on it. Nope. Let's try it again. I think it's too bad. So what happens is in that image, if I go back one more, guys, if you could help me, no? No, doesn't want to pull up. So it's a very good image. I'm sorry. Works perfect when you drop it off. Classic. We already talked about this. So was me pushing an athlete who jumps in the air and he lands on one foot. And he has to land in a very awkward position. And some would say, if we just looked at the landing by itself, was his body is twisted, his knee's a little bit valgus. But I look at it and say, was the timing right? Did he hit the ground? Did he have good force? Was he able to go into the next play of the activity, regardless of the situation that you find yourself in? So we start having all of these things come connected. Reconditioning, athletic normal, competencies, literacy. Remember, I talked about making these connections and painting some kind of a picture of where we're going. A couple of years ago, this guy, Jeremy Shepard, he's a sports science biomechanist type guy, has worked in Australia with surfing and snowboarders, and he made this statement to me, and I'm like, yep. So those words created images for me. Making shapes and changing shapes. That's what sport's really about. Making shapes and changing shapes. What shapes do you need to make? What shapes can you make? Can you get in and out of these shapes with precision, style, and grace? And do you have the strength to be able to repeat it? So all of a sudden, you keep simplifying this down to this physical education approach and say, dude, you just got to make shapes and change shapes, and do you have the ability to do it regularly? Because it's never going to be clean and perfect. Well, when do you start to learn, and I really hope this plays, bro. When do we start to learn, all right, that these shapes are things that we can use in the rehab and the reconditioning process? It's about a 2-minute video, so we'll see if it goes on. These two athletes, mostly featuring one, this is 2 to 10 weeks after ACL reconstruction. He's a professional hockey player, it works. He's a professional hockey player. It's sped up, yes, it is sped up, and I do this just so we can get through many different little video clips. But what we're looking at is what kind of things can you do to physically educate an athlete? I also believe from our previous 2 speakers and Dustin, there's definitely some brain training going on. And so physically educating people and doing all of these types of activities very early after surgery is the only way I've ever done reconditioning of athletes for 30 years. Because I took it from a phys ed approach. So I'm not doing virtual reality, I'm just doing actual reality with a lot of different brain training type scenarios. And it's intent, or this is the intent. This isn't just trying to make things for the athlete to do. It is getting them physically strong. It's making shapes. And now, because the previous speakers have just set this up, you should be able to make connections to what the researchers are saying, to what you're seeing happening. Because I've made those connections for a number of years. This is when they're just about a week after surgery. So I don't do straight leg raises. I just hold the leg off the floor while they roll. Okay? They play games, they pick the games, every day is a game, and like you said, let them make the choice of which games they want to play, how they want to modify the game, how they want to cheat, and how they want to get on with it. So if we can look at this situation that perhaps early in the rehabilitative process, we can decrease this degradation of neural activity that's taking place that can last for 1.5 to 2 years. One of the strategies that I've had to try to reduce the influence of this brain injury is to not let the brain get silly or forgetful, to not let the brain get dumb, basically. So how I've been fighting it, through lots of strength, but motion, movement, playfulness, strength, confidence restoration, and a little bit of fun. And that's what we can look like at 10 weeks. So if we can get to this place in 10 weeks, they're not playing hockey. If he was a footballer, he's not playing footballer. We're just sending him on a path to be in a better place, to be that kind of athlete in the near future. So with a lot of physiotherapists in here and some young physiotherapists and students, and we have instructors, are you allowed to make shapes? Do you allow your students, do you allow your therapists to make shapes, so to speak? Meaning, do you allow them to be progressive and look at the research and try other ways to improve the situation that we're in? And is there a consequence if we don't do those things? See, movement is pretty essential. I read this, I think Plato put this on Instagram last week. So it's been around for a little bit of a time now. Activity is very good for everything that we do. Movement is medicine for creating change. These things and these statements and this philosophical approach has been out there forever. But something weird happens when you do surgery or they have an injury. Movement is no longer medicine. We shut things down, not everywhere, but very commonly the approach is stop moving and allow biological healing to take place. But I've always only recognized as movement heals. And this isn't just at the local lesion, it's at the brain level. Movement heals the body. So I've been seeing this more often as a protocol-induced disability. They have surgery on the knee, they put this knee brace on. Sometimes you need it for a short period of time, like a week or so. Sometimes, though, unfortunately, it's abused and it's left on for multiple number of weeks. It's like parking a car on a garden hose and trapping the water. The water can't flow. The straps create this bulbous type knee that creates the inability for it to bend well, extend well. Okay, there was a little video that just shows this boy's knee. It gets very stiff and tight and so forth. Okay, but are we progressing if we accept close enough? Meaning, it's okay, that knee might be stiff, it'll come out, you work on it, keep working, and over time, it will get better. But at what cost or what consequence is there to some of the strategies that we're looking at trying to promote healing, but possibly affecting outcomes and function? Because there's a brain injury, there's a brace, there's an ugly looking knee. Oh, we fixed it, but what does it show up when they're 8 or 9 months playing competitive hockey in the professional ranks? Has there been a deficit? Strategies to protect might not be the best medicine to preserve the quality movements. So, a little analogy that I've used for the past number of years. It's a story. We have a Formula One race car. Let's just call this an elite level athlete. All right? There's a crash. It happens. Now we have to rebuild it. It's no problem. So I know how to fix that. But all of a sudden, as I'm going to fix this car, a new manual is given to me that says you have to follow this manual to rebuild the car. You have to use different people, possibly, to rebuild this car. It's not how the athlete or the car is normally put back together. And at the end, we see what we get. So it's silver, it's a Mercedes, it's a coupe, it's fast, but it's not the same. And at the highest level of sport, or for just a young 16-year-old girl who really enjoys playing soccer, that is the highest level for that girl who doesn't get back to playing because you didn't get her back to being a Formula One. You got her back to being something else. And then they don't play sport anymore, or they drop out, or they don't play at the same level. But in the professional ranks, close enough is not good enough. You have to be able to restore it back to a Formula One race car. So for us in this room, and for the colleagues, and for the world that's doing the research, do you know that those two things are different? And do you even want to know? And this is what is driving me to continue to try to improve my processes. I want to know how to make a Formula One back into a Formula One race car on a regular basis. But I keep coming across people who really don't know the difference, and they don't want to know. So we're not evolving, or we're not changing rapidly enough. And the data and the science that's coming out is helping the discussion, but we still have to improve how we deliver. So I heard this quote, protocols are there to prevent failure, not to create perfection. It's fantastic because what it tells me is that you don't know everything that's out there. We don't have all the answers. And the reality is there is no one way to do this. There's multiple ways in order to bring someone back from these injuries. But what I want to tell you is I think we are underestimating the power of the first third of this process. The first third of the comeback, of coming back from these ACLs, it may be the most significant process that we have to do, especially because of the brain insult that is associated immediately following these injuries. So if we break this up into thirds that we're going through this process and so forth, my apologies. If we break this up into thirds, the first third, as I showed, was making shapes and movements. Remember, all that says is move an athlete, be creative. Don't just treat the knee, treat the whole. If you do it well, and the athlete starts bending well, up and down and squatting and moving and so forth, not lifting heavy weights, but just sequencing movements, then the middle third is really easy. Just put some strength behind it. Because the final third, of which some of the biomechanical analysis studies that were done today and so forth, it's almost too late. Because you're starting to run out of time. Because you might be at 7, 8, and 9 months, and they still are missing the physical literacy and competency that could have been established far before. So getting the first third done well, but getting more creative, may have far a greater impacts on the quality of the final third. I believe this. So it really comes down, also, is this can-do mentality versus can't-do. But the reality is, in the medical model, as it should be, they want to protect and do no harm, and we need to do that. But there's protection-based, often forces us in the more can't-do mentality and mindset. So we need to get the doctors or the head physiotherapists to be on board with a more progressive approach. And if you all want to be more progressive, you have to open your lines of communications. What you need to have is a group of people that you're associated with that said, I want to know the difference between a Formula One and a coupe. I want to know how to improve that. And I want to be a part of a team with a very forward-thinking sports medicine group that is associated with it. This type of conference that we're here today with is pushing us in that direction, and so I welcome the remaining of this throughout tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bill.